Hello, everyone. We are moving on to our next unit, which is inventions and innovations. And an invention is something new that somebody built, and an innovation doesn't have to be something somebody built, but like an idea that then made things better. And essentially, we're going to start talking about the industrial economy. And after the Civil War, the United States transformed from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. And agrarian, that means agriculture. So it has to do with farming. The United States used to be big on farming, but that changed. We went to an industrial economy. And that's where we're making buildings, we're making lots of stuff, we're in factories. We're not really farming anymore. There's still some farming, but for the most part, our economy now, we're industrial. I mean, if you look at Virginia, Arlington, D.C., I mean, we have hotels, we have factories. You don't really see farming anywhere around here. It's because we're an industrial economy. Farming, you have to kind of go to the South and Midwest to find that. Uh, so why did we have this transformation? Why did we go from a farming uh, country to a industrial economy? And one of the things it's called laissez-faire and capitalism and special considerations. And what happened is land was given to people who built railroads, bridges, or just even roads. So those people who spent a lot of money and they built the railroads, remember they were given land, and on that land they would start to build cities. They would have people go there, and then if they built anything, they put on the railroad. But that's called laissez-faire. So that was just people got special considerations. And the other thing is the increasing labor supply. Labor is working. And mainly this came from immigration and migration from farms. So we talked about immigration last period. There's millions and millions of people that were coming to the United States. So it wasn't hard to find people who needed to work. I mean, you just find an immigrant, there was millions of them, and you have someone to work in your factory. Same thing with migration from farms. Remember, people aren't farming anymore. So all those people, before the Civil War, there were slaves, and people who used to work on farms, they're leaving. They don't live on farms anymore. They move to the city, and they're now working in factories. So there's a ton of labor in the United States during this time. And after that, there's two more reasons. America had a wealth of natural resources and navigable rivers. And so when we say natural, we're talking about minerals. That's things like gold, silver, diamonds. Those would be minerals. Um, Oil, we had lots of oil. I mean, we have trees, plenty of lumber. And navigable just means boats can go on it. So when you see navigable rivers, that means it's a river that a boat can go on. So, like the Potomac River, that's a good example because the Potomac River, boats can go on it, they can bring stuff back and forth. Uh, so, those are some reasons why the United States does so well. And there's also something called limited liability corporations. We're going to talk about that more later, but you do have to know the four reasons for economic transformation are laissez-faire capitalism, the increasing labor supply, the possession of natural resources and navigable rivers, and limited liability corporations. So next we're going to talk about some of the industrial leaders. The first one we're going to talk about, his name is J.P. Morgan. You guys might have heard of that. It's like a bank today, but J.P. Morgan, he was an important person in banking and finance. So if you were going to start a company, you had to get a loan, and he was one of those people you go to because you would go to the banks, or if you wanted to invest money, anything to do with finance and banking. J.P. Morgan was a very important person during this time. Another important leader was someone named Andrew Carnegie, and he led the expansion of the American Steel Company. And steel became very important this time. Steel is a very cheap metal that is used to make building, trains, bridges, and lots of other common things. Um, should have pulled up a picture of steel. I have one right here. Like this is steel, but I mean cars are made out of steel, trains are made out of steel, roads are made out of steel, and if you build a building, you have to have steel inside the building. It may not be as small as this, might be bigger ones, um, but steel is very, very important. And in fact, I do have a picture of steel. This is all steel right here. It's being used to make this building, but steel is very strong and it doesn't cost very much money. It's pretty cheap, so it's good to make buildings with. And Andrew Carnegie, he's the one who did that. The next leader we're going to talk about, his name is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he was a leader in the railroad industry, so anything to do with building trains. He was one of the leaders of the railroad industry. Next is a guy named John D. Rockefeller, and he was a leader in the oil industry. And oil, you have oil in your cars, and you get oil changed. Oil, a lot of people don't know this, but oil is actually used to make all kinds of things. Oil, like the roads that we drive on, those have oil in them. Lots of products that we use have oil. Gasoline, you need oil to make gasoline, so oil is very important. And John D. Rockefeller, he did that. And really the big thing with oil is if you have any type of machine, it's going to need oil. So he really made sure oil was available for everybody. Next we're going to talk about the inventions and the innovations. Remember, inventions is an actual product. It's something that you make. Innovations, that's an idea. It doesn't have to be something you make. Innovation is an idea, whereas an invention is something you make. The 6 we're going to talk about are corporations, the Bessemer still process, the light bulb, the telephone, the airplane, and the assembly line manufacturing. So the first one is a corporation or limited liability. This is an innovation. It's not something somebody made. And what it is, this made it so people who own a business would not lose money. So if the business was in debt, which means owed money, and went out of business, the people who owned the company would not owe money. So this protected people who owned companies, and it was safer to own a business. So if the company owed money, it was the company. So if you, like, let's say I start a company and I call it Mr. Verloop's Comedy Club or something like that, and my club goes out of business and it loses lots of money when the club closes, just the club does. I actually didn't lose money. The club lost money. So that's what limited liability is it kind of protects companies. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Bessemer still process. This one is actually an invention, though some people could say maybe innovation, but it's an invention. And what it is it was a way to make steel, and it made it cheap and easy to make steel. And before this process, it was very expensive and took a long time to make steel. So remember, steel is very important. You need it for trains, you need it for roads, or not roads, but you need it for buildings. Really, if you make anything, you have to have steel. But it was very expensive. That's why the Bessemer still process, when it was invented, all of a sudden steel was cheap and it was very easy to make. So this one is another invention, and this time it's the light bulb and electric energy. So Thomas Edison invented this, and he didn't only invent the light bulb. You have to know he discovered a way to use electricity for power. If you have a factory, it's very, very important that you have power. The machines have to run. And the light bulb's important too, because instead of working only during the daytime, if you own a factory, you can work at nighttime now because you have light. So the light bulb is very, very important. And remember, electricity is needed to charge your computers, phones, turn on the lights. So he didn't invent electricity, but he made it so it was easy to use. And he also invented the light bulb, which is very important. The next one is an invention, and this is the telephone. And I think you guys know what this is. It was invented by Alexander Graham Bell, and this made it easy for people to communicate with each other. So if you lived in Arizona and you wanted to talk to somebody in Michigan, you can just call them. It's not like the phones you guys have today. This is what the first telephone looked like. You'd put your mouth right here and talk, and then you'd also put your ear there. So it was different, but that's how people communicated. The next invention is the airplane, and it was invented by the Wright brothers, and it made travel easier, cheaper, and faster. So this is the very first airplane they came up with. Only like one person could go on it. It really, when it was first invented, it wasn't all that great yet. It took a long time. But this is it. That's what it looks like. And yeah, but you guys know now, lots of people can go on airplanes. It really doesn't cost that much, and it's fast. If I, like for spring break, I'm going to go to California and visit my family. It's going to take 5 hours. That's not that long. If I was going to drive there, it would take 3 days. If I was going to go on a horse, it would take weeks. If I was going to walk, it would take months and months. So airplanes made it easy to travel, cheaper to travel, and faster. Alright, next one is an innovation, and this is what we did for our kind of our warm-up today. But it's the assembly line, and this was invented by Henry Ford. And an assembly line is where there is a line of workers making a product, and they are only responsible for making one part of the product. So Henry Ford, when he did it, he did it for cars. He had something called the Model T, was the name of his car. But each person only had one job. Like these people, looks like they're working on the wheel, or sorry, not the wheel, the steering wheel inside the car. And that's all these two people do. They don't do anything else. They're not doing the hood, they're not doing the bumper, they're not doing the engine. They are only doing this part. And it was easy because it's easy to train people too. They don't have to know how to make up a car. They just know one part. And it's very faster because you don't have to move anywhere. All the products move to you. So this made it faster, easier, and cheaper to make items in a factory. So for Henry Ford, when he did this, cars used to cost maybe $3,000. And when he was done, cars only costed $910. That I know it kind of seems like a bit, but back then it was much cheaper. Cars were much cheaper after him. And people use this now for everything. They do assembly lines anytime you make something because it's quicker. Because of all these other things, something else that happened during this time was the emergence of leisure activities. Some examples of that are sporting events such as baseball. A lot of people started going to baseball games, became very popular. Vaudeville shows are kind of like a comedy show. I'm going to show you guys an example. And the other one, people go to amusement parks, they go to fairs. Here's kind of like an amusement park. Hershey Park, that's an example of a fair. I don't really think it's all that funny, but this is an example of a vaudeville show. Let me fast forward a little bit. And it's like, remember, there was no movies back then. There was no plays. Or sorry, there was plays, but there was no movies. So people would go to a theater, like how you guys have the little theater at school. And people would dance, they would sing. And it was a show. It lasted a couple hours, and sometimes they weren't funny, sometimes they were. But this is an example of what one would look like. See, it has a really tall person, a medium person, and a small person. It looks like he keeps getting knocked over and pushed down. But that would be an example. If you guys really want to watch it, you can watch the slideshow when you're done. If you have any questions, let me know. Remember, this is a quick unit. I'm probably going to be testing on this in about 2 weeks. So let me know if you have any questions.